You may now begin.
Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to this special work session of the Housing Opportunity Commission. I'm Roy Priest, the chair of the commission. I'd like to introduce to you the fellow commissioners who are present today. Vice Chair Fran Kelleher, Chair Pro Tem Rick Nelson, Commissioners Jackie Simon, Commissioner Pamela Bird, Commissioner Jeffrey Merkowitz, and Commissioner Linda Kroon. All members of the commission are, in fact, present. This special work session is to discuss two items that will be presented by the staff, dealing one with our property management RFP, and the second one is the initial discussion about our strategic planning process that we'll be following. So those are the two items for discussion at today's special work session. I'm going to now turn the meeting over to our Executive Director, Chelsea Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, commissioners, members of the public, and HOC staff. As stated earlier, this session is a working session, and it's part two of an ongoing discussion that we've had with the board in regards to our property management RFP. We will walk you through a couple of slides and have an opportunity to hear your feedback so that we can ensure we're in alignment with the desires of the board moving forward with a procurement that we hope to issue at the beginning of the year. The second part of today's meeting will be focused on previewing and getting feedback as it pertains to the strategic planning process. I'm accompanied by a number of staff that will be supporting throughout the presentation today, and would ask our IT division to please begin presenting the PowerPoint. Thank you. So this is our second discussion. Next slide, as it pertains to the property management RFP process and our hope to really reimagine what that looks like so that we can attract the companies that are best suited to provide resource and service to us and our clients. Today's agenda will include, of course, welcome to all of you all, as well as members of the public. We'll set the stage in terms of our next steps throughout today's discussion. I'll provide you with a summary of the main changes to our evaluation metrics that are resulting from the feedback that we received from you in October. And then in this meeting, we're going to try our hand at utilizing some of the virtual tools that allow us to quickly determine where to spend our time, where we have consensus, and where we should spend more time for discussion. So I ask your indulgence. We will participate in a couple of polling sessions to get some initial feedback. And as we get to that stage, I'll explain further. And then we'll transition. We want to talk about matrix and make sure we're all in alignment with what our matrix should be, and then get into the scoring. How do we weight these different metrics? And then go into next steps. Next slide. Just as a refresher, in October, we met with the commission. We had an opportunity to hear some good feedback in regards to your expectations, in regards to how we should potentially consider and frame out this RFP. And as a result of that meeting, we are here today to provide you with how we have modified the RFP proposal based on your feedback, and then really focus most of our time here today on the scoring matrix, which we didn't have as much time to talk about in that first session. The goal is to make sure that we're all in alignment. As our general counsel has indicated, this is an open meeting to the public, but this is not a meeting where we will be getting any formal votes. The polling process is really to just get consensus so that we know that we're headed in the right direction. And so that's reflected here on this slide as well.
Just give me a minute, Chelsea. I'm not seeing anything on the screen but other members participating in this presentation. I'm not seeing a share screen of any kind. Is everybody else seeing it beside me?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yes, I see it.
Yes, try going way up to the top to the view options and do side by side.
Yeah, I already have that one.
You already have that one?
Yeah.
Maybe enlarge your screen. It might show both the screen as well as the gallery?
What happens when yeah, well, okay, yeah, when I move the participating screen over, I can see the slide. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. And just in case anyone is having some challenges, and for the members of the public, all of these materials are on the website. And then we can also make sure you have them easily available via email. Next slide. So a summary of the main changes. This outlines the feedback that we received and how we incorporated your feedback. One of the key things you may notice is the change of our vernacular. We are not referring to this as core values. We're referring to it as our evaluation matrix, and a number of other areas where we receive feedback on how we should consider these different matrix and how we should word these different considerations. And instead of reading them all verbatim, I'd like to just pause, afford you an opportunity to review and ask if there are any questions. We will be going through each of these areas to make sure we're on the same page, but you'll see that we took the feedback that we received from the commission and tried our best to incorporate it into this new version.
Chelsea, is it evaluation metrics or evaluation matrix?
That very well might be, it's matrix, and it's my challenge with saying matrix that's making me say matrix, but it's not it's not M-A-T-R-I-X. It's M-E-T-R-I-C-S.
Okay. Metrics.
Metrics. Thank you.
Okay.
And let me pause. So you see that we did take the feedback, we incorporated it. You'll hear more as we move forward, and we can go back to this slide as need be as we move forward. Next slide. So this is our first poll in terms of us ensuring that we get consensus on where we have currently identified the evaluation metrics. We want to make sure that we have a chance to hear from you. There are, in a moment, we will launch the poll. The key considerations here are, do you agree and support for each of these metrics, which would mean that we do not need to pause and have conversation about that particular metric? Do you agree with most and support, which means, you know, I agree with this in its general sense. I don't need to belabor the point. No discussion is needed, and or can I not support, and therefore discussion is needed. The way that we like to make decisions on our timing is if there is over 50% that feel like they cannot support any metric, then we will pause to talk about that metric. And so let's go ahead and launch the poll, and please share if you have any concerns, but you should see a poll. It will go through each of these questions. Do you agree and support the minimum qualifications evaluation metric? Do you agree and support the qualifications and capabilities evaluation metric? Do you agree with and support the current and past performance evaluation metric? Do you agree with and support the proposed property plan evaluation matrix? This is not scoring. This is just the metric. Uh-oh, I'm hearing feedback. And so this is just the metric itself. I'm going to mute you, Commissioner Simon, because I think it's coming from your device. And the management fee vendor cost evaluation. Also the MFD participation. And then after we get through this part of the conversation, we will transition to scoring.
Question, Chelsea, on these choices, suppose I agree, but I still want to have a comment, make a comment. What do I check?
So this is where you have to decide if either you agree, because we're trying to just get consensus, mostly agree and support would probably be where that lands. But the threshold to open conversation is really the cannot support. And what we're trying to do is just get to a point where we're really identifying the areas that we should pause and have where there's not agreement on, so that we can spend our time on those areas. And I'm hopeful everyone is seeing the panel, excuse me, the options here.
It does feel a little funny to vote before we've had conversation, or to, I guess, poll before we've had conversation.
And so the conversation would be based on if we agree with these metrics, or would we be focusing more in terms of scoring? Because it is a scoring area.
I mean, I suppose sort of like Roy, I have, a couple of questions. I don't have any, I have more questions on the scoring than I do on this, but, would still like the opportunity to be able to ask questions.
Oh, absolutely. And so I guess what we're balancing, and definitely please feel free to ask questions and give initial response. This isn't there. First of all, the responses are anonymous, and we will have opportunity to circle back and kind of hear feedback along the way, just trying to balance the time. We did think that there'd probably be more robust discussion on the scoring, since we spent quite a bit of time previously on some of these areas, but we can circle back and we can re-poll too after, if there's additional thoughts that come out. This was just to get a lay of the land in terms of what areas do we need to focus on. And this is a consensus-driven approach that has worked for larger meetings in terms of how you determine what are the areas we should spend time talking about. So feel free to indicate cannot support because you want discussion, so that we can figure out what are the areas and what are the slides, and we'll bring those particular slides back up and we'll focus our time on those. All right, now it looks like we have about 4 commissioners responding to the poll. And only commissioner should be responding, so this is just commissioner. And then this will help us inform which slide should we pull up to talk about further, because there seems to be either a desire to talk about those areas in further detail.
I would also like to say, I think we need probably to talk about them all. This might be great for a big meeting to prioritize something, but I don't feel like this is really an appropriate way to approach a discussion with your board. So can we agree that we're probably going to talk about all of them?
Sure, then we probably have to agree to have another meeting with more time, because and that's not a problem, except for, of course, us trying to keep with our time frame of trying to move forward. But I can definitely take us through each of these slides. And I can also, if you just take the time to indicate which areas you don't support, we'll also have a quick sense of where there might be concerns, and that would help us understand where there are concerns, unless there's concerns about all of them. And then we're revisiting the entire conversation.
We're spending more time talking about the survey. We could be talking about the metrics. I think we ought to follow Fran's suggestion and just go through
Just
the
move
metrics.
on.
Okay. Well, we will end the poll. We will go through each of the slides again. And I'll ask my team to, don't worry about sharing the results. and we will go through each of the slides on each of the areas.
Mhm.
Next slide. Oh, we have to unhide all of the slides since we'll be going through each of them. And all of the slides were provided in advance as well. All right, so the revisions are in blue. Next slide. This is the minimum qualifications. We spent time talking about the fact that we wanted to consider providing minimum qualifications for a respondent to have a certain threshold. One of the key considerations that we heard from the commission was wanting the experience of executive staff to be counted towards meeting a number of years of experience. And so as you see in blue, that is something that we added to this consideration. And I'll pause and ask if there are any other thoughts or questions about this particular area.
The only question that I had about this particular area was that this does not have a weighting. This is not a weighting metric. This is a threshold metric. And
Yeah.
so my question goes to, I don't have any problem with the way it's written or structured, but who does this evaluation of meeting the minimum qualifications, and how, and who's responsible for making a final decision to eliminate somebody because they don't meet the minimum qualifications?
That's within our procurement office. And they are provided with parameters by both, and work with our legal division as well as the division that is issuing the procurement to make sure we understand what thresholds should be considered. And that's consistent with regards to how we handle all of our procurements.
So the procurement office looks at the proposals and makes a determination as to whether or not the minimum qualifications have been satisfied.
That is standard, and it is allows for our procurement office to.
I'm not questioning that, Chelsea. I'm just asking, is that's what you are doing, is leaving that decision up to the procurement office with no other oversight from anyone else in the organization like yourself?
Yes, I do not. The executive director does not get engaged in the procurement process, really, with the exception of if there's an appeal or a concern that's raised. So
Okay.
our procurement office does handle the review, and then we also keep the division arm's length from making any determinations on who meets the threshold. The division that might be requesting the procurement would play a role in giving guidance in regards to what that threshold should be. Are there any other questions?
Well,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I just had a quick question on the financial viability. Is everything listed there? Is that all that we mean by financial viability? That they've got financial statements and that they that are true, not in bankruptcy, solvent, no material litigation, or are there any sort of minimum metrics that they would have to meet there, like, you know, a certain net asset ratio or a certain amount of assets, you know, or reserves or anything like that? And I'm not necessarily proposing, I'm just trying to understand here what we mean by financial viability, because I suppose an entity could be, you know, have financial statements and not be in bankruptcy. They could be solvent, but, you know, they may not be particularly sound. And so I'm just wondering if there's more to it, or if that's all we mean by minimum in this case.
I'll turn it over to Tim. This was something that we did talk about in terms of the pros and cons of setting certain ratios and, at the last meeting, and felt like it was a little difficult to figure out what that exact amount may be. But Tim, can you expand or expound?
Sure, yeah. I think that when Lady and I were taking a look at how other jurisdictions and organizations handle these types of minimum qualifications, really we landed on these specific items. We did not want to do a deep dive because we thought that that potentially could lead to some difficulties in staff being able to review it. But as we took a look at what other organizations were doing, it was really these few minimum qualifications.
And
Okay.
I certainly think that in terms of minimum qualifications, that certainly responsiveness and minimum experience are clearly areas that are traditionally looked at as thresholds. The financial viability suggests that and I'm not suggesting you don't have this, I'm just saying it requires a level of expertise beyond to do an analysis of someone's financial capacity, okay? And everybody may not necessarily have that skill set that may work in your procurement section. So
Yeah, the way to resolve it, we don't have to spend a lot of time on this. I'm fine with it, but the way to resolve that would be to have certain ratios that the applicants provide the data there, and so you can see right away. There's no math or interpretation required by staff. They would just see, do they meet the minimum ratio or standard that we've set. But I'm fine with this. And Chelsea, we probably did talk about it last time. I probably asked the same question, since this is how we do things at, at the CDFI fund. Yeah, so.
I think, Commissioner Merkowitz, you raised a great point, and to be candid with you, our team spent a great deal of time on this because this was a brand new requirement we were trying to bring to the forefront here. We were balancing, making sure that we work with a company and enter into contracts with companies who have the financial viability to be consistent and to be able to provide us with services over the course of their contract, with not creating a threshold that might ultimately eliminate certain companies because of them being small or some of the other challenges to be as competitive. Or so that was like where the conversation led in terms of the thinking about the pros and cons. But we landed with at least having them provide financial statements and ensure that they certify they're not in bankruptcy, that they're solvent, and that they don't have any material litigation. And that certification was an ongoing requirement if we enter into a contract with them to provide us with a certain amount of notice if there was any shift or change in their financial position.
If this is a certification that they're responding, is certifying to these things and signing and saying they've done that, and you are looking at it and saying they have provided that as part of the minimum threshold, I'm fine with that. But if you're going into the level of review that's suggested here in the writing, let's say this is what they're certifying to, correct? They're certifying that they are not in bankruptcy, that they are solvent, whatever solvent means, and that there are no material litigations.
Yes. So we're asking for both the statement and the certification. So we'll keep those statements that they provided to us at the time, along with the certification, as our support for their position in regards to their financial position.
That's all you're asking for. That's fine. I have no problem with that.
Okay. Are there any other thoughts? Yes. I see Commissioner Simon.
My concern is at this stage, I am anxious that this not be made a decision to eliminate without further review or consideration, simply because I think we want to encourage more firms to be bidding. We want to give a broader group of people an opportunity. And if there is compensating information that suggests they should be considered by the broader group, I would hate to have it be a cut and dried. If they make the certifications, I would feel better if this minimum was not an absolute at this stage. I would prefer to see it go through the process, because for one particular job, particularly if someone's applying to be in our pool, one particular job, a lesser standard might be, particularly a lesser financial, might be perfectly adequate for the scale of the job for which they are applying. And that would be my reservation.
Jackie, these
and
are
concern.
pretty minimum. I mean,
Mhm.
to ask that an entity not be in bankruptcy.
Well, I
don't-
agree that that's
know.
certainly an absolute, but when we talk about going further and ratios and so forth, I don't think that ought to come
Yeah,
in.
I'm not proposing it, Jackie.
Okay.
I asked the question, but I said I was not proposing it.
Okay, thank you.
Next.
Next slide. Okay. This slide refers to qualifications and capabilities. This is the narrative response. And so everything that's in blue was a revision based on feedback. So changing the title to qualifications and capabilities, as well as adding the narrative that describes their general experience with managing properties and how that's applicable to the specific property. So being clearer about that. There was a lot of discussion that we had previously related to how to really address the customer surveys component of things in this particular round, where we might have companies that have surveys, some that don't, some who do their own surveying, some who use different tools, and all agree that it is challenging to take survey result data from different sources, especially if they're self-promoted surveys. But we could ask for them to still provide the information that they do have on surveys. We could also ask them for their methodology and their own results from their own surveys, so that we at least get a sense of what they have reflected here. But it's part of a larger scoring criteria. It's just one of many indicators. Our goal is to really lean in and use the scoring and provide some level of weight around that once we have deployed our own survey that we can use consistently with the companies we contract with. But we can still get data and information to help inform this process as per the request of the board. And we're also asking them to give us details about their MFD and diversity and equity and inclusion policies, as well as how they respond to crises and manage major events. And these are all reflective of the discussion that took place in October. And I want to, again, this is the narrative response. You'll notice in the next section, we'll be discussing and having an opportunity to hear more quantitative objective data, but this is where they have an opportunity to tell us all about themselves and why they're the perfect fit for this particular proposal that they're responding to.
Just one question on the management criteria on demonstrated experience working with nonprofits, PHAs, and/or government agencies. Are you looking for them to be housing-related nonprofits and/or government agencies, or you just doesn't make a difference as long as they identify they work with any nonprofit or any government agency? It doesn't make a difference as to whether or not they are related to the field of work in which we are procuring services.
Since this is related to property management, I would hope that whatever the respondent would respond to would be as closely akin to the type of work we're soliciting for. Maybe they're able to draw a connection between them providing some kind of management support or property management support in the education realm or in another space or place, but this is up to them to really describe how their experience has prepared them to be most qualified for the role. And we're not being prescriptive to say you can only refer to this particular industry, but allowing them an opportunity to really sell themselves and why their experience should be considered.
Under the customer survey, are we suggesting that customer surveys is the only way to determine customer satisfaction?
Oh, I don't think so at all. But I think where we landed, our staff recommendation was to not include customer surveys at all in this stage. But we did hear the feedback of the commissioners and know that, of course, we want to make sure that we're moving forward with a company that doesn't have a bad reputation. There are many other ways to look at how a company is performing. We try to capture some of those in those objective forms. But you could, for example, if a company has REACT scores, but if they haven't been in the PHA space, they might not have REACT scores, or, so it just is one of many tools. And what we did here was really try to at least gain an understanding of, tell us what you do have and tell us how you really do obtain information about how you're performing. But I will tell you that many of our current companies, according to their own surveys, are doing very well. And I think our customers or the call center might reflect otherwise. So again, wanting to be responsive to the desire to at least have some kind of information at this stage. But ultimately, when we move forward with entering into a contract, that's when we expect to have a more baseline protocol in which we'll be able to evaluate.
The only comment I was making is that by limiting the question or the metric to customer surveys, it seems to imply that that's the only way to measure it. I think, and the discussion that we've had is customer satisfaction surveys being one of the means to determine that. So, I mean, it seems that we ought to be asking them, how do they approach and or measure customer satisfaction, be it survey or something else?
Okay. Are there other questions or comments?
Yeah, I would agree with the more broader approach instead of just limiting it to customer surveys, because there's so many ways that companies can get data. So yeah, I like that, just for them to include their approach to customer satisfaction,
Okay.
such as surveys maybe.
What are some of the other ways that we would think we would potentially see that show up?
Well, if a customer is running like customer relationship management tools, there could be metrics that they can get from maybe tickets that are open, how many tickets, how long did it take us to resolve them. It could be, if you want to look at how many phone calls came in. I mean, there's so many ways that they can perhaps look at the data, find ways to extract it and make it meaningful to them internally. So making it broad and letting them tell you how they ensure that their customer satisfaction goals are satisfied, I think is probably something I would leave up to that company. And then we can interpret that reading their proposals or their responses.
Okay. All right.
I would add on to that because I think you would be in a quandary otherwise if some people had survey data and others didn't. I don't know what you would do with that information. But I think if you looked at not only what Pamela suggested, which is great if they have that to provide, things like, quite frankly, tenant turnover and how long have their clients been clients. I mean, those are two indicators as well, whether or not people are happy with the service they're providing, although very general.
Some of that is in the current and past performance, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have references or anything like that, if that would make sense as another way of determining customer satisfaction, but just a thought.
we definitely will broaden the language. This is just tough because if you have someone who has a very robust CRM and someone else who has robust surveys, and we're trying to compare them all with different materials that they may respond with, it will be, a challenge, but we will have a chance to at least see what they've put forward. And then again, moving forward, we'll be able to put in our own metric. Okay. And then if there are no more questions on this one, I want to keep us moving along and move to the next slide. This is the current and past performance. This is more of the quantitative response based on the feedback that we received from commissioners. We've included 2 other considerations: the turnover and vacancy rate, as well as the respondent to provide the NOI and debt at properties. And to just kind of clarify related to the NOI and the debt, it's our position that, of course, as a property management company, their goal and responsibility is to ensure that we get revenues and to help keep our expenses limited, which ultimately feed into our NOI. So wanting a chance to see how they've been successful in doing that over the last 5 years at their different properties. And Commissioner Kelleher, I see your hand.
Yeah, I like the NOI. I think that really is what we're asking them to manage, in addition to the quality of the residential experience and the safety of the building. I'm a little still perplexed on the debt, which they have no control over. I'm assuming we're not going to delegate to them refinancing of our properties, and I assume other owners who have hired them to manage the property similarly don't, and probably in private real estate investment groups would not even reveal that to their property management company and would consider it proprietary. So I don't know what you would do with 80% of the people don't have that information, and or even if they had it, would not be allowed to disclose it based on
And you're frozen, but I do believe we got your sentiment. I just want to make sure that you're able to hear us in our response, Commissioner Kelleher.
Something's going on with Zoom today.
Yeah.
Chelsea, do our third-party managers know what debt we carry on the properties they manage?
I will turn it to Kayreen to answer this question, but it's my assumption that they would know, because that's a part of the goal is for them to be able to ensure that our expenses remain low and that their revenues cover the debt. But Kayreen?
Yeah, good afternoon, commissioners. They typically do know the debt on the property. They are provided with an amortization schedule, which has the debt amount and the payment schedule over the life of the loan. And so they do have that information, and that's part of when they're preparing the budget, that's part of the full budget where revenue, expenses, and debt service is included. But I wanted to comment on Commissioner Kelleher's comment on the NOI and why it would be difficult to compare and to really give any meaningful credence to NOI. It's going to vary from property to property, and so it's going to be hard to say property A's NOI, the performance is good for that property because NOI is significant or large when compared to property B or C or D. It is the debt service coverage that will give us the most meaningful information, because the NOI will tell us a number. The debt service coverage will tell us how many times is that NOI able to cover the debt. And the debt for most properties, the debt payment is fixed. And so it's not expected to change. It's just a number based on the amortization schedule that gets plugged into that analysis. And so that's going to be meaningful to us when we evaluate how that property management company is able to manage expenses and collect revenue for a particular property. So that will be informative to us as we evaluate them.
And I'm assuming this is related to the properties they already have under management.
Right. That's right.
It has nothing to do with our properties that we're.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, that's fine. Could you explain just very briefly what you had in mind when you talk about narrative options to explain any issues with their numbers?
This was in response to the fact that if your rent charges and collection history is low, for example, because the building was under renovation during half of the year, or and you were relocating residents, or there was some, explanation for why your numbers are what they are, giving an opportunity for the respondent to provide some context.
Yeah, so that assumes that the respondent is going to self-indicate that they felt that some performance indicator was in fact below what should have been sort of standard industry practice, and so they could offer a narrative explanation.
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Simon?
I would like to, if we could for a minute, to go back to turnover. I think it's important to know how quickly the turnover can be as far as the property being ready, and how quickly the paperwork is being done. If they're maintaining the waiting list, or if they're drawing from us where there can be lag time, I think those are different ways to be looking at turnover. And I think they are critical.
And those areas definitely would be focused in on as we get into our renewal applications. And we are thinking through kind of our internal scoring and looking at how quickly a company provided us with or began the process to turn over when someone moves out. But definitely what you've identified are key areas where the property management company and their responsibilities can be evaluated in terms of how well they are maintaining the properties and how they're utilizing the waiting list. So there's a number of areas that we'd have to take into consideration. This is a little more objective because these are companies who may or may not be working with us. And so if they are dealing with a Class A building or even not, they might have an explanation as to why their vacancies are what they are, which is why, again, we wanted to afford an opportunity for narrative. But what you've identified, Commissioner Simon, is key in terms of how we evaluate our current companies in regards to how well they're.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. Thor would like to join the meeting, but that's fine. Any other questions? All right, we'll move on to the next slide. This is the proposed property plan. We shared that this was a new ask. Well, it's something we've always asked for, but we've broken it out to have more emphasis on this particular component because we've realized that it is very important for a respondent to be able to demonstrate how they plan to approach our property. And the one thing that we did add based on feedback is, if applicable, must include a plan for unit turnaround. And this is in alignment, Commissioner Simon, with what you just indicated. But this was some of the feedback we heard from you, but ultimately we're looking for a company in responding to our solicitation. Again, this would be, we're soliciting for senior properties. Tell us how you plan to market, manage, handle our maintenance, if applicable, subcontracting, as well as staffing, and really ensuring that we have some thoughtfulness in the responses we receive.
I agree with what you added, except I'm not sure why you have if applicable. We should have a plan for unit turnaround with all developments. I mean, you're going to have some vacancies, right?
Right. I think that, and I'll have to look to the team to respond. This particular area was, I think the, if applicable, was related to a different area. And let me see who is best suited to respond to that. I agree that a
Yep.
plan for unit turnaround should be included, and I don't see anyone from staff chiming in here. So it might
Yeah,
have,
sorry, this, oh, can you hear me?
yes, thank you, Marcus.
Marcus Urban for the record. Yeah, so, yeah, so this is something that would be, that should be included, just as a property reaches out of its, lease up phase and gets to stabilization, that there would be a time for, terms. And sorry, I'm getting a notice on my screen, so apologies if my connection is.
You were cutting out, so I didn't hear all that, but anyway,
I think
my-
what was
my
being,
point was made.
absolutely, and I think what might have been the viewpoint was, in terms of getting units ready for full occupancy, maybe that was the consideration in this instance. But you're absolutely right in terms of unit turnaround. And there are some circumstances where we have hybrid environments where the property management is responsible for one part and we're responsible
Yeah,
for another.
yeah.
So we'll have to be clear about our role
Okay.
and expectations there too.
Right.
Okay, right. Next slide. I see. Next slide, please.
So,
Oh, are we here? Sorry. Okay. Apologize for that. Management fee and vendor costs. This is the other metric that we've recommended here. We wanted to get a sense of the costs and the fees that they'll charge if they're awarded the contract. And based on the feedback we received from the commissioners or from you all, we wanted the respondent to provide a breakdown of how the management fee is calculated. The other components remain the same in terms of us requesting information.
okay,
Okay, next slide. MFD participation. You see here in blue the areas that we've updated. Subcontracting at least 20% of the contract value. We wanted to make sure that the wages, that we clarified wages paid to MFDs working on the project. We provided additional context, performance of the work by MFD firms or MFD employees based on the feedback that we received from the board. Any?
May I ask on this? I just noticed that at no point do we make reference to veteran preferences of any kind. I know the county does. I'm just wondering, is there a reason we do not consider veteran service, military service, or is it been an oversight, or do we not think it's applicable?
so are you, Jackie, are you asking a question as to whether or not we would want to have companies who were applying who were veterans?
Yes.
It's nothing that would preclude them from applying. And you saying we should encourage?
Well, it's preferences.
I'm asking whether we have considered it and whether we should or shouldn't. Is there a reason that we haven't?
I don't recall discussions on the commission about a preference for veterans, but if we were, it would be a whole different discussion.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure this is the place
All
for
right.
that. I mean,
Yeah,
without
I think it's
offering
a
an
large,
opinion, I think
larger
it's
discussion.
a larger issue.
I
because there could
think
be
it
other
probably is
preferences.
too. I'm just raising the flag to
Okay.
comment
I
on
think
it
this-
and for future consideration.
I think this language may come from statute or regulation from one of the political entities that we are under.
This is language that's used in the county related to supporting minority, female, and disabled firms. There definitely are other areas that the commission could consider at different points related to preferences and, you know, looking at our overall procurement values. And but as it stands, this is the area that has been a key area of focus for the commission. Yeah. Okay. Next slide. And so we did go through and respond to other concerns that might not have fallen into these metrics. We provided this in the slides that we gave earlier. Wanted to just indicate that we went through and updated, and you see all of the areas where we either included it in the RFP based on the feedback that we received. How do we address Section 3? We made sure it's in the RFP as well as included in the management agreement. And you'll see this across the board in terms of us incorporating the feedback from the commission. And so I will ask that we move to the next slide. And just doing a time check, wanted to make sure we're getting ready to now shift into conversation around scoring and weighting. This part of the conversation is hopefully could be straightforward, but could potentially require some deliberations because of course there's different scores that different commissioners may want to put additional weight to, and coming to consensus on that and making sure it all equals 100 is something that we were also trying to take into consideration on how to approach this. And so again, we as staff provided our recommendations. We solicited some initial feedback from commissioners. You'll see we tried our best to kind of outline where we did receive information, but then also recognizing that some commissioners, of course, will want to just kind of have a chance to hear the feedback from commissioners before weighing in on the points. Next slide. You'll see that this slide just shares with you what our proposed scoring metric is, and that's the score on the left, and then what the current scoring metric is, and that's on the right. We spent some time at the last meeting kind of indicating where we've made our shifts and changes in our recommendations here. Ultimately, you see that we removed points from responsiveness and made that a threshold question. You see that our recommendation is to take those 10 points and to provide 5 points for additional 5 points for qualifications and capabilities, and to add points where there were not any before for proposed property plan, and ultimately to remove giving points for customer satisfaction and allow those responses to be incorporated under qualifications and capabilities. Next slide. This slide gives some feedback in terms of where commissioners, your initial responses have landed with supporting staff recommendations. In an attempt to not cause another polling conundrum, I'll try a different approach here. And that is to take each metric and I guess get a thumbs up or a nod of approval if we're okay with that score. It's hard to do it step by step because if we get to the end and you're not okay, then we have to go back and rescore everything. But let me just allow.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, I was going to say, let me just open for folks to ask questions and to give their opinions about where scoring should land.
Yeah, because I mean, it does seem like, you know, likely the biggest area would be on the costs. And I was just curious if you all could explain your thinking behind that. I see that, you know, 20% is the weight that we had given it previously, but I also note that, you know, with other RFPs, price is usually a much higher score. I think I was looking at one, you know, where it was 40%. And, you know, I want to, obviously, the service to our residents is the priority. But I guess I just want to understand the thinking of why we, in other RFPs where we do it at 40% and here we're doing it at only 20%.
I guess I would turn to the procurement office to answer that, because I'm not certain. It depends on if the service that you're referring to, Commissioner Merkowitz, would have been customer centric, or if it was a service that was being provided to us that would potentially lead us to be more focused on costs versus how they perform and how their work impacts our clients. But I'm not familiar with which RFPs or if there's a standard approach that we've taken to give a score of almost close to 40% on cost. I will say here that we were trying to balance and make sure that there was an ample focus on MFD participation, as well as bringing in this new requirement for proposed property plan. And so that's where you will see the staff adding additional value and taking away the vendor costs as being the key consideration. But Lady, do you have any other context to provide? Is there a standard that we would typically use for cost?
So when it comes to the evaluation criteria, basically you're looking at it from an individual perspective, the services that are being procured for. And that will actually determine what the scoring metrics will consist of. And so what will the decision that basically will need to be made is what are the most important factors and how we would like to weight those factors. So in this scenario, there are various factors that are important. It's just determining which ones are going to be the most and giving them that appropriate weight.
But Lady, have we had a tendency, I guess, in our past procurements to have costs of, almost double what we're giving it weight for here? Is there some past practice that we're deviating from, or is that just, it depends on the procurement?
It depends on the procurement. So all of these, the weight of the factors will have to be dependent on the procurement.
On each of them, okay.
Yes.
And I would just add that the spread on pricing and property management is pretty narrow compared to other procurements that we undertake, where there can be a much, and often is a larger variation in pricing, especially like things like architecture and general contracting. So spread is often pretty narrow in property management. So that's part of why that is generally weighted a little bit less.
That's good information to have, because that's part of what my concern was, that, if there is a wide spread, but narrow differences on quality and qualifications, then. But if you're saying that, the costs are usually come in pretty close, then yeah, I think that would make sense then to weight other factors a little higher.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that, I agreed with the proposed weighting that was given, because of the fact that typically what a respondent looks at is the evaluation criteria, and they try to write the most to the one that gives them the highest points. Well, what we are saying is that these things are equally important: performance, past performance, your plan, as well as your fees. And so I thought that was a fair way to balance it out. I know in the past we have given 10 points in terms of MFP. This proposal is 15. And since we've been talking about trying to really emphasize that more, is why I thought giving it 15 points was certainly consistent with what we are saying, is really making that more important as a consideration for selection.
Mm-hmm.
I will simply comment that I saw value to giving cost at least a quarter of the points. If we're so worried about the financial performance that we're asking them to disclose the debt financing of their other clients' properties, then I think it would be unusual for us to only give the cost of what they're going to charge us 20%. Although I hear what you're saying, Zach, I still feel as if at least a quarter of the value of the contract should be the cost. If we want to increase the MFD to 15% from what we have traditionally been doing at 10, I would suggest that qualifications and capabilities and current and past performance are quite overlapping categories, and that the combined amount there of 45 might be higher than it needs to be. And perhaps we could take 5 points from the qualifications and capabilities and add it to the MFD participation.
I thought you were going to say added to the management fee.
Oh, well, we could do that too. Give it to you at 30.
Yeah, I'd rather put it there than, yeah.
Yeah.
I personally was thinking that you could take the 5 points and put it on the fee. That was, I mean, the first three categories are 60% of the points, and they get to management. The fee and the cost of managing our properties is significant, and we've got to indicate that we attach some importance to it. So I think 25% at least would do that.
Are there any other thoughts about that? So it sounds like both Commissioner Nelson and Commissioner Kelleher suggest taking away. Are you suggesting reducing both by 2.5 or reducing qualifications and capabilities by 5 points?
I'm suggesting reducing qualifications and capabilities by 5 points.
So the recommendation would be to reduce the qualifications and capabilities by 5 points and to put management fee and vendor costs at 25. So
right.
Qualifications would be 20, current and past performance 20, the property plan 20, management fee 25, and then MFD 15.
So that would then say that the most important thing to us is in fact the costs and fees more so than qualifications as a single index, okay? You're giving it the most weight of all these points, and 25 going to the fees.
Except, Roy, I understand that point, but when you look at what's included in qualifications, capabilities, current and past performance, those are really overlapping elements. So you can't really say we're undervaluing performance. I don't think. I mean, that's my own.
Agree. I would have combined those as one category, but.
So I was proposing quals at 25, current and past performance at 20, dropping the management fee to 15, management fees to 25, or I could go to 30, and then keeping the MFD at either 10%. However, I would be open to, if a larger company showed that they were willing to subcontract to a MFD, we could individually look at that. But I'm not sure if we really had that option in the criteria for MFD participation, because sometimes the bigger companies are able to subcontract out to maybe a MFD firm. But the proposed management plan to me can take a lesser hit. I kind of agree with the management fees and the cost of how they're managing the financial resources are more important to me than the other things.
My preference would be to say that qualifications and capabilities and management fees are the two most important of these 5 criteria in terms of how I would weight them. And so we should make them both 25, and I would take the points away from the proposed property plan, which we've not used before. It's a new thing, which I think is very important. Mm-hmm. And I would take it from there, and maybe from the MFT, which has been 10%, but I would definitely want to be able to articulate the two most important things from our standpoint are the fees and the qualifications.
Yep, I had those numbers too, so I could be swayed with that. So 25 and 25 on the clause and management fee. And then proposed property plan at 15, and then the MFD at 10.
But isn't the proposed property plan the standard to which we're going to hold them? And I would think that ought to be, with them going in from the get-go, ought to have be a clear understanding that that's what we're going to be evaluating them on, is what they said they were going to do and what we thought we were contracting for.
I think 15 is going to give me
that,
some information on that, but I want to make sure that their qualifications and capabilities to properly execute their property plan is important. But again, the management fee and cost too. I would still rate that higher, a little bit higher than their property plan.
Yeah.
Well, I think we could maybe go at this from Fran's initial proposal that qualifications and capabilities and current and past performance be merged and have 20 points, and then you can do the costs and participation and spread those points otherwise. But qualification, current and past performance are your qualifications that you're bringing to it. So I would think it'd be relatively easy to merge those at something less than 45 points.
One subjective where they're actually just kind of providing narratives and who they are and how they believe they're best suited. And the other is really the objective criteria that speaks volumes in terms of what their occupancy rates are, their rent collection, and those numbers, those hard, fast numbers that we'd like to be able to compare company by company on that very specific objective data.
Which one was that? Can we go back to that slide, Chelsea, please?
Sure, that's the, let's go back to current and past performance slide. Thank you. This is the
and this is a new proposal, right? So a new firm is not a renewal.
This
so
is
if
for
I'm
new.
Yeah, so if I'm already with you doing business with HOC and I'm submitting a renewal, so is it coming through the same criteria?
Yeah, renewal, someone who contracts with us now will have to apply anew for these sets.
Okay, so yeah, so here we're asking for, this is most important. Okay. So yeah, I would either make this one 25 and then the quals 20. So if I'm new, where are you gonna ask for references on this data, the turnover, vacancies? How are we going to validate or verify the data
we were
that
going
they
to
provide?
We're going to provide them with a template that they have to complete, and it will include them identifying what properties they're referencing and all of these different criteria.
Okay.
I mean, I think the correlation between current and past performances and the property plan, those two add up 40% of the points. And these two correlate to me together. If you look at past performance, you look at that against a plan, that's what you're looking at. But I want, so.
Excuse me, Roy, 1 second. Can we go to the plan slide? The property plan slide with the criteria on it?
Number 11.
Okay. Excuse me, Roy, for that interruption. So you're saying that these kind of go together with my performance?
No, I'm not at all. I'm saying these two factors right here, the proposed property plan. And so you're looking at the other one on past performance. Past performance saying, here's what we have done. It can some of the same matrix that you're looking at that you want me to include as management criteria in my proposed property plan.
Yeah,
Okay?
that's what I meant by going together. Like if I'm already managing some properties, I should be able to lift that information and create a property plan for you.
Exactly.
Because if I'm doing well with existing properties, what I'm telling you I'm going to do for you, I'm going to plug in the goals that you've set for me or objectives. So this property plan should be fairly easy for me to develop and follow if I'm a solid company. So that's why I was thinking that we could bump that from 20 to 15 and put more weight on their performance or make them equal. That could be an option, but I still would like at least 25 on the cost that they plan to charge us.
Pam,
or
on your
manage.
point, I agree about reducing the possibility of reducing the plan, but I do think that the plan is a little different than just taking out the good elements of your past performance. The plan is telling you what are the special characteristics of the property you're asking me to manage.
Yes.
And this tells us whether they really understand that property. And there's some properties that we know from past history require some different kind of understanding and skills. So I still want to see that.
So
I'd be willing to accept the 15 points for that one, though.
So my question here, though, is when they submit, if I'm submitting a proposal to you, you're saying that they're going to bid on a particular property, right? And so I've given you, I'm asking you for a plan, but I really don't have all the information on that property until I get there, right? So I guess I'm trying to understand when they would develop the plan.
A part of the RFP process will be us providing very detailed information about the property.
Okay. And so we would provide them the goals and objectives we want them to also satisfy, to include in their plan?
No, I don't think we would tell them. They would tell us how they intend to provide these services, what their pre-leasing or marketing plan would be, how they plan to manage, how they plan to staff it, maintenance, all of these areas based on if this is a if this is a family property or a senior property, if it's, all of those different criteria that might be different. If it's new versus if it's one of our older properties where they need to have a more robust
scattered site.
Yeah, all of it.
But again, it's their proposed plans to do that, to manage it, right?
Correct. And that's where we want to see some, not just a vanilla response, but some intentionality in terms of, okay, I know what it takes to manage cider mill. Okay, we have all these lights. I need to make sure I have a light plan. I know that we need to make sure we have whatever it is, understanding the property and how they would approach ensuring that we maintain the property in the way that it should, and that their management of that property is sufficient for the type of property they would be managing.
This is a new RFP that we're issuing. Everybody has to apply. And we're introducing a new standard beyond what we've done before, and that is the proposed property plan. So most of the firms that we're going to get responses from are firms that we have done business with in the past. A large proportion of them doesn't mean there won't be new companies that won't apply. And so I'm saying, so for anyone who's applying, this requirement is a new requirement for proposed property plan. And so I would have no problem with making it less than 20 and making it 15, only because of the fact that, and let's see what we get in response to that. And we may see in a future RFP, we may see the value of putting even more weight to that. But right now, I think that if we were to look at, if we were to agree that qualifications and fees, if it represent half of the points, 50 points, then how do we allocate the other 50, which would go between proposed property plan, MFP, and the, what's the other, the fifth criteria?
Let's go back to the scoring page. And let me just say this, just to be clear, we have always asked for a property plan. We just have never pulled it out and scored it separate and apart. So that is the difference here. We're saying this matters to us. Every single RFP in the past, someone has had to say, this is what we'll do. We receive very vanilla responses. And this is an attempt to say, we want to know specifically how you plan to service our senior property, how you plan to service this property that's located in this part of the county. Are you going to have bilingual staffing? What are you doing to ensure that you're able to provide the type of support that this particular property will need? And so this is why we've pulled it out as a separate component, but it was always there.
Well,
Yeah,
to that point then,
go ahead, Jeff.
what was it part of? What was it part of previously, Chelsea? Because I'm just, we never had anything that was above 20 points before. And so if it was if it was part of something previously, we've elevated the value of this and whatever we pulled it from.
Yeah.
So
Let me see if staff can pull that. It was a part of the last PowerPoint where we identified where we were bringing that. So if you give us a moment, Paige, do you have that information?
Yeah, if you go back to slide 11, so we requested the plans in prior RFPs, but they weren't scored separately. Instead, they were scored as part of the responsiveness category. So as did you have a property plan or did you not?
Yeah.
And that was only 10 points previously.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm supportive of what Roy is proposing there. I think it makes sense that especially if it was, and before it was only, sounds like, do you even have one? As opposed to now we'd be evaluating it a little more. So we'd be giving it more points either way than it got previously as part of something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate where Roy is coming from with, at least the message that we're sending there. But I also agree that, 25 is probably more appropriate for the fees.
Okay, let's go back to the scoring page. So what we're hearing is a potential reduction in the proposed property plan by 5 and adding 5 to the management fee.
Mm-hmm.
How does that land with everyone?
I'm all right.
But did we have enough were we keeping the MFD at 15?
Yeah.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yep.
So that's good. That's a good outcome.
So you've got one.
I think we should go with it and acknowledge that a year from now, after the next 2 issuances, we'll reevaluate to see how it worked out. I mean, I don't want it to get totally locked in case something,
And that's why
something obviously wrong.
Yes, and we're of course taking the feedback from the commission. This is a formal vote. This is just an opportunity to get the consensus. So,
yeah.
Okay, I don't feel like I'm hearing any objections.
So we can do this all over again in a year, right, Chelsea?
Right. But by then, I will convince you all of the benefits of polling. But I'll work on that between now and then.
Hey, I like the polling.
I'll work on you all over the course of the year. But okay, did the team get that? We're at 100.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this concludes. I think the next slide helps us understand the time frame. So we are at the stage where, with this feedback, we're able to finalize the procurement for this RFP. As we shared, our goal and hope is that at the beginning of the year, in addition to releasing this RFP, we're able to host a larger procurement fair and try and encourage other businesses to engage with us. That's something that we're at the beginning stages of working out, but want to give you a preview. We will follow up in the beginning of the year to kind of share how that comes together and when it will occur. But our hope is that in the beginning of the year, we're able to encourage businesses to not just participate in the RFP for property management, but to even understand where there are other opportunities to do business with us. And then in that same time frame, we will release the new property management RFPs. We do need to get those out as soon as possible to avoid any lapses, and appreciate your cooperation along the way as we've been extending the contracts as far as we can to get us there. And then once we get that first batch out, it will be a quarterly process until we get through all of them, so that they're not all at the same time, and allow us an opportunity to go through this process and get everyone under new contracts. We will also circle back with more information. We have done some good research on different companies for preparing surveys that can be used not just at a one-time basis, but can also be infused with some of our other tools that would allow us to get ongoing feedback. So stay tuned. We're working on providing more details there. And with that, let me pause and ask if there are any questions related to where we are and where we're headed. Okay, we are over time. I did send out the next deck. I do want to still, if we have folks that can hang on for a few moments, at least preview where we're headed in the beginning of the year. And as we all start thinking about the year ahead, we will be entering into the strategic planning process. IT, can you switch to that deck, please? Commissioner Priest, are you okay with us going over, or do you recommend that we pause and reconvene? If we reconvene, it will be at the, the beginning
I
of the
thought
year.
we were scheduled to go to 6.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I'm free until 6 o'clock, so we can get through what we can get through until 6. I have got to, that's a hard date time for me.
Okay. That's great to know. On my calendar, it was 5:30. So if you all have the time, we'll get started here. We are at the stage where we're prepared to begin the process of strategic planning. What I wanted to do in this time with you all is provide some high-level concepts in terms of how we would approach a procurement for a consultant to support us through the strategic planning process, and to also talk high level in terms of timeline, and have an opportunity to hear your thoughts here, but also welcome any additional thoughts one-on-one that Patrice could help us schedule if anyone so desires. So next slide. So on the left side, I want to just refresh in terms of what the purpose of this 5-year strategic planning process would be, and then I will walk us through what's being recommended in terms of the approach. So the purpose is really for us to, as an organization, have an opportunity to look at how have we performed to date, create alignment amongst our board, staff, and our stakeholders on where and how we should be prioritizing our efforts moving forward, for us to have an opportunity to identify areas for improvement and even new areas of focus for us as an agency. We've identified some key considerations for the 5-year plan. Again, these are large buckets. The goal is that this process will also help inform and also help refine where we should move forward. But at a minimum, this 5-year plan should include us being very clear about our vision for the next 5 years, what our priorities are, what our goals are. For example, reducing our waiting list by X% by this date, what some of those objectives would be. And then we've identified some key focus areas just based on our core functions. And that includes really making sure we have a clear path forward related to how we engage with our real estate development initiatives, our resident services, our finances, and looking at the financial viability of the organization, as well as the ability to support our strategic plan. Looking at information technology, which obviously at this stage is a key priority for most companies, and we need to keep it core for us as well. Our communication, that's internal and external, as well as looking at our partnerships and then personnel or staffing. So I'm certain there are other big buckets that we may through this process reveal should also be areas of focus, but this gives us some initial indication of where we would be focusing some attention. And then the implementation of the 5-year plan would be something that this process should also cultivate. And that is having the plan without the operational implementation plan is the plan that goes on the shelf. So we want to have a plan that we can actually begin to put into practice and reality by looking at how do we get it done? What does it mean for our staffing? How do we make our what's feasible for us to accomplish in these certain periods of time in terms of metrics, as well as funding. And so that would be, this is just the backdrop on the purpose of the strategic planning process. And then it gets into really how do you get that done? The RFP that we would issue to solicit responses would outline that we're really looking for an innovative consultant that can bring a streamlined approach, but also an inclusive approach that allows us to get information in terms of an engagement strategy that would also look at the ecosystem. And when we reference our ecosystem, that's everything from HUD's strategic plan to HUD recently put out a plan on ending homelessness and where the state priorities are, or where Thrive touches us, or the COG goals, all of the other entities, and even some of the cross sector organizations, education, health, and others that might also influence where we land, but having a good understanding of how the ecosystem will impact our strategic plan and goals moving forward. We would be seeking an evaluative approach, report from the consultant. So ultimately having the report that we could reference, ensuring that we're able to give clear feedback to our stakeholders in terms of what we've learned through the process, and then thinking through how do we get this information out, and that would really be a part of that first phase. And then the second phase would be focused on really bringing all of the staffing and the leadership along with the consultant to say, how do we operationalize this? What would this look like? What will we accomplish in year 1, year 2, year 3? What are some of the key performance metrics? How would we need to adjust or modify staffing? How do these metrics show up even in our performance goals? And what kind of budget and path forward would we need to accomplish these goals? And so our recommendation, or my recommendation to the board, is that we take this 2-phase approach. The truth is, with strategic planning, some of these processes can become extremely prolonged, and it can sometimes get to a point where by the time you're a year out in strategic planning, the initial data and information you had gets stale. So I would strongly recommend that a part of our request for our respondents include how can you take innovative and what's your best effort in terms of timeline, streamline, but getting us the data we need to make that informed decisions and affording enough time for the board to engage in the process to make these strategic decisions. So trying to balance all of that will be key. And so I did send this out just not too long ago, but wanted a chance to hear a response before I go to what would be a proposed timeline, a tentative timeline to move forward, and open for thoughts and feedback. And Commissioner Simon, I see your hand.
I would really like to suggest that we consider a 10-year plan, simply because our development process takes 5 years to get through and to move toward. I think 5 years is too short. If we have a 10-year plan, then as we identify the goals, we can set a priority and still have a two-phase approach. But I think it gives guidance to successive commissions. And I feel like we've had times where we've issued a 5-year plan and we've numerically achieved it within 2 years because of acquisition of a large property. And so then we've exceeded the goal, so what? But how does that, achieving that and incorporating those achievements give us the building block for even farther out? And I think that it would, given the size of our operation, the number of staff, I think to look at a 10-year time block just would give more stability and a greater focus on purpose incrementally as we go. And I would strongly urge consideration of that proposal. It gives us more time to plan and set priorities and allows us, without having to go back 5 years from now and do a whole 5-year plan again, that's the whole enchilada. It would say, all right, now we've had 10 years, we've met these goals of the 10 years or some number of them. How do we adjust so that each year we are looking at what we are doing and continuing to plan on out to the extent we can as new studies become available, and new agencies evolve and new programs evolve, that lets us bring these programs into our plan and incorporate them in an intentional way. And I think that would be very helpful.
Let me say, Mr. Simon, I agree with your underpinning for what you recommend for the 10 years, but I also feel like we are in an environment right now where the volatility of so many things that affect our business is happening. I would not want to reach out necessarily for a 10-year plan, but do a plan for 5 years and not have to wait until 5 years to look at it again. That what we do is that we annually evaluate where we are, relative performance against that plan, and then we can add on another year to our plan, another year as based upon some realistic kind of standards that we'd have to use and changes that are happening in the field. I mean, I've been in the field a long time, and I've never seen as much volatility in so many areas that affect us in the last few years. And so I would not want to, I just think that a 10-year plan is going to be really stale. And I don't know how anybody today could project out 10 years. And I think that, I don't know. I think we'd be better off doing incremental adjustments to the plan rather than doing a whole 10-year plan. That's just my sense about it.
Well, I expected that with the 10-year plan, we were doing a rolling evaluation. We haven't sat down and done a plan for quite a while. And I think that's important. Now, if we go about it and diligently stop and take stock each year, that's one thing. But our elected officials are for 4-year terms, and our commissioners are appointed for revolving 5-year terms. And I think it's important to have a long range with annual, whatever. I guess what I'm seeking is, let's be doing this diligently and committed to it and committing the time. And I think we've just felt other things keep getting in the way of our doing a very intentional plan on a routine basis. And I think we need to be doing that.
Well, we agree with that. Other comments, Jeffrey?
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Roy. I think 10 years is too long. You can't plan that far out. You don't know what's going to happen. There's going to be new things that come up. I think, Jackie, to your point, is the problem if you are able to hit your goals in 2 years. I mean, but with a 10-year plan, what do you do if you hit your goals in 3 years and you've got 7 years left on it? I think, if we're failing to do a strategic plan every 5 years, that's our bad. That's not a problem with the plan. That's not a problem with the plan, though. That's, and I also agree, you should be, I don't know that I feel you have to be tacking on a year each year, but you should be reviewing it annually. I think some of the goals and objectives are not purely numerical, because if you do hit some of those goals, you have to have, I mean, a good strategic plan has a lot of aspirational stuff in there that you may not always hit in 5 years, but that you're working towards. So it's not that you can't talk about or include in the plan things that are going to take longer than 5 years.
Yeah.
But you set the benchmarks that you want to achieve towards that during those 5 years, and then you're reevaluating, and you should be looking at it every year to measure your benchmarks. So.
Other comments, Rick?
Yeah, I think the 10 years is too much. I like the idea of reviewing and tacking on, except that I would propose you don't do it every year. A strategic plan is a serious burden on the staff as well as on the commission. I mean, it's an intensive effort, and to have to go through that every year is more than I think we should think about. I think if we really determined to do it every 2 years, set it as a planned event, then we could really update it. If you update it every year, you just finished a few months before. So I personally would suggest 5 years with a set review and updating and adding on at 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I think we can certainly work toward that, because it's unfortunate that a lot of organizations do strategic plans, and I think
put them on the shelf.
Put them on the shelf. All we're trying to do is to create a plan that really has ability and sustainability, and also is incorporated into the operational day-to-day life of the organization. And part of that is what Chelsea talked about, including it as part of the evaluation system in terms of performance, so we can be able to track that. And while I agree with you, Rick, that we may not have to change things on an annualized basis, and a 2-year window is a good time to have a more formal process. But we're going to know every year some report from our executive director on where we are relative to our performance.
I think having a report on where we are is one thing, but having a reevaluation and a reassessment is another.
Yeah.
I also think we, as a part of the strategic plan, if we're going to get one, we need to, in fact, include it in discussions and decisions we make. How does it fit or not fit into the strategic plan?
Yep, and that can be a standard used as part of the evaluation that's submitted to us in terms of proposals that come to the committee and to the commission when we look at new initiatives and things like that. Just as we do about money, we do the same thing about our policy.
Yeah.
Other comments?
I think that's exactly right. I think a lot of what a strategic plan does, I mean, we've heard this commission complain in the past, like, how are we guiding our decisions? What's guiding our decisions? A strategic plan should give us the framework. It's not just the numbers, like that we're going to hit the X number of units in, but it's like, well, how are we deciding where we want those units to be? What size we want those units to be? So it's putting it in that context. What's our strategy? And so that when a new proposal comes to us, we can evaluate it in the context of our strategic plan and what are the goals, objectives that we've set for ourselves. And so we're not just doing things on a piecemeal ad hoc basis and saying, oh, this sounds good. We're saying, okay, how does this fit into what we said we wanted to do?
Yeah, great. Very good point. Other comments?
I'll just add that I'm fine with 5 years. I think a halfway point update or revisit might be very useful, but having it worked into budgets and worked into performance evaluation criteria on an annual basis is what's going to really keep it a living, breathing kind of document. I'm glad to hear that we are going to be looking at HUD. I have to say, when I was at NARO's conference, what really hit me over the course of the 3 days is the number of housing agencies commenting on the fact that HUD has essentially gotten out of the public housing business pretty much entirely. They haven't paid to build anything in 2 decades and are putting everything into RAD, which puts all of the long-term financial risk on the agencies, and then are funding everything else by vouchers. And that they are really putting all new money, or Congress really is telling them through the appropriations process to put all new money into vouchers. And so I think, how do we deal with that kind of an environment where financial risk is being transferred to us when we can't appropriate and don't have opportunities to create new revenue streams? And what does that mean in terms of the importance of vouchers to us? Those kinds of things I really think are conversations we need to have based on the trends and changes that have been going on with our primary funder, which is HUD. So I think it's wonderful to do this. I think it's perfect timing in so many ways, with a new director, new census data, newly elected officials. We really are privileged to be able to take the time to right now look at what all that means in terms of our responsibilities as a board and as a commission to helping assure that there's affordable housing in Montgomery County. So let's go.
Comments? If not, you have something else you want to present, Chelsea?
Yes, thank you. So thank you for the feedback, commissioners. And again, if there are other thoughts, of course, definitely open to having further one-on-one discussion. Let me share the next slide. And this slide gives a potential timeline. This was aspirational. If I had it my way, we would be issuing an RFP this month. We have crafted what we believe to be, or with staff support and my instruction, to be an RFP that we could move forward with, that outlines those key parameters that I just provided to you all. And we'd want to afford enough time for a respondent to go through the holidays, but to also have some time in January to provide responses. This is a procurement that, quite frankly, based on what we expect to be the threshold, could have gone through a less formal process where we just send out proposals or request solicitations from companies, but to make sure that it's a transparent process to ensure the board's engagement. It's our recommendation that we do the full RFP. It is a much longer time frame, however, so we were balancing that. It would ultimately, if we are able to get the RFP out in the very near future, it would result in us potentially bringing this to the commission in terms of the consultant's recommendation that we would move forward with at the February board meeting, with the hope of being able to begin in the springtime by March engagement with the consultant. You'll hear in the next slide how we intend to ensure commissioners' engagement, but that includes retreats and making sure we have all of the data that we need to help inform this, and our staff would also be working in tandem with the consultant to get all of the information needed for this process. The thought would be that between the months of February or March and June / longer, that they would be, and we would be engaged in the strategic planning process. Ideally, although it is ambitious request, It would be great if we were able to conclude phase one of the process in terms of feedback and thinking through where we want to land within a 4 to 5 month time frame. But that might not be idealistic for consultants, or even as consultants respond in terms of what's their best guess in time frame. So we, instead of giving those tight parameters, will allow the consultant to respond in terms of what's the best, most streamlined, innovative approach that they can take in the timeline that they believe it would take to get there. And then ultimately, once we receive that information and go through that process, then we will have an opportunity with our full plan to pause and think about the operational side of things, bringing our director and our directors and our leadership's team to the table to say, what would it take to operationalize? I will say that in regards to the RFP process, one way to include commissioner engagement, and we can go to the next slide, that we're proposing is that in addition to staff participating on the panel, the RFP panel, we would include both the chair and the vice chair as observers. That would allow them to participate in interviews, but not score or rate any of the respondents, but at least be a part of the process and have a chance to raise questions on behalf of the commissioners of the consultants who would respond. The other proposal is that, again, to ensure that the board is fully engaged in this process, that we would bring the consultant recommendation to the board for approval, regardless of the contract threshold, so that the board is fully engaged and has a chance to hear why the recommendation is to go with that particular consultant in comparison to the other respondents. We do anticipate, and we'll make sure we plan for enough time to plan for a commissioner retreat to go through this process more deliberatively without distraction. And then on an ongoing basis, I will update the commission in regards to where we are in the process. And so let me pause. Let me go back to the timeline and get some reactions in regards to if that timeline feels right, if there are concerns, other considerations. And again, I know my ideal of a 4-month window might not work, but would love to hear where you all, what your reaction is to the next steps.
Comments? Fran?
Looks doable to me, Commissioner Byrd.
I think 4 months might be ambitious, but let's start with that as a goal and see what the consultants come back with as what they think is viable. I would say that I think you need another bubble for a board approval between phase 1 and phase 2 for the board to approve the strategic plan and then develop implementation plans out of it. You have the board approval for the engagement of the contractors, but I think we need to add one for approval of the plan.
Okay.
I would agree that 4 months may be ambitious. I mean, I think it depends on how much time is able to be dedicated to this. I'll admit that I'm in the process of helping lead a revision to our strategic plan at the CDFI fund, one that I wrote 5 years ago. And we've been working on it for the update for a lot longer than 4 months. And we're not planning on making, major changes. But again, some of this is because we've got a ton of other things going on and haven't been able to focus on it as much. So it'll kind of depend on how much you're able to dedicate towards this.
And I'll call you offline so that you can give me some additional fresh perspective on how best to streamline this process. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, and then in the next slide, I'm hopeful that there's support around the role of the chair and the vice chair as observers and overall.
Why
support.
observers?
Why?
Why observers and not full participants?
Because then they would not be able to vote in the board meeting where you approve the actual consultant.
Why
If-
not?
we would probably recommend a recusal if you're involved in the actual scoring of the contractor to then also vote on the contractor. I think
That's
that's
not happened before. I mean, before we've had commissioners who participated in the process and then they have voted.
I think that that's something that we can look at to make sure that there is no,
Conflict.
yeah, conflict. Because we don't want to do that, because I mean, that's why more sort of more informal role of just being able to observe the process and whatnot. That doesn't mean we can't ask questions, but I mean, we could, but we would not be ones who would be voting to advance any one specific contractor over the other. So, but we'll take a look at that. But
if you're doing that, why couldn't any commissioner observe what's going on with the meetings online
OMA.
at least?
OMA.
okay, because you can't. That becomes a formal commission meeting.
I see. Okay.
I'm comfortable with being an observer in that
All right.
I assume that the management team has great judgment and would understand to take commissioners' input seriously.
Okay. Well, I think you can bring down the slide. Thank you, IT. 2023 will be definitely a year. Oh, am I frozen? Okay, no. Here we are. Definitely be a year for us to reimagine the organization. It is also, as I think Commissioner Kelleher indicated, a prime time. I know that many people, local and afar, are looking to us in terms of how we do the work we do. And so, and looking to us for guidance in terms of what priorities should be and where we should be putting resources to address affordability shortfalls in this county. So really looking forward to engaging in this process. We will move forward with solicitations so we can get the best of the best to work hand in hand with us, and stay tuned. And I see Commissioner Priest, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, he's going to say that it's a bewitching hour, past the bewitching hour. And I want to thank the staff for both presentations, both on the property management discussion as well as the one on strategic plan. And I think we've made a lot of progress, and it's great to see the organization advancing as quickly as we are to start moving in two great areas around our procurement and around our vision for the future. So I'm excited about that. And I want to end this by saying, first of all, we want to get a motion to adjourn this meeting. I don't know whether that's required because this is a special work session. I'm asking you, Audrey, do we need to adjourn?
I will move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
You can do either. Since there's no further items on the agenda, you can also just call the meeting adjourned.
Okay. There are no other further items to come on this agenda. So in fact, the meeting is adjourned, but I want to wish everyone a Merry, 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 Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. So this time will go by very quickly. And so we are excited about where we're going in 23, and thanks to the staff and the commissioners for all the work that we have done for this past year to get us to this point. So thank all of you all, and have a great holiday season.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all, commissioners.
Happy holidays.
Happy Hanukkah.
Thanks, everybody.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.